Hi, friend. Hope you're doing well, and welcome to another episode of the Your Audio Solutions podcast, where it's my mission to find the tools and methods from the people that inspire you so you can apply their knowledge to your own life and work. And on the show, we have a great guest, Matt Wallace, the record producer, mixing engineer. He has worked with bands such as Faith No More on the record Angel Dust. He was actually, what was it? Kerrang nominated as the most influential album of all time, which is pretty badass. He also has done Maroon 5, Song About Jane, The Replacements, and many, many other bands. And it was awesome having Matt on, and we spoke a lot about music business, and you'll hear all about it in the interview, but he brought up something that was really interesting, and it was the argument that he's in fact not making, or not him exclusively, but if people say you make a lot of money in the music industry, it tends to not be necessarily true all the time, because usually you're working twice as hard, or at least twice the amount of hours that a normal person does. And I love that Matt brought this up because it's so true, and it doesn't get spoken, doesn't get mentioned too often with the people I interview sometimes. Sometimes we get into this, but the notion that, you know, you have to work a lot of hours if you want to work in a recording studio, and that's something I never enjoyed. And I'm sure if you listen to this podcast, you've heard me say that many times before, but I love that he brought it up, that Matt brought it up, because it rings true, and I think it's important to hear. And also, he brought up something interesting, and if you have been in the industry, worked with anyone, the notion that if you're cheap, or if you offer cheap rates to your clients, they usually tend to demand more of you, and that's very true. So it doesn't always pay off offering your clients cheaper rates, because you end up working probably more than you should if you offer premium. And Matt brings up some good examples where clients have, where he has offered his usual fee, and sometimes when he has offered lower fee, how the client has been more demanding, etc., etc. And I thought it was really interesting and really valuable to hear. We speak about a lot of different stuff that I'm sure you're gonna enjoy. And also in this interview, we speak about you hear us speak about the mess in the U.S., but this is actually just a day before they stormed the Capitol Hill. But still, it's just damn crazy what's going on in the U.S. If you're listening to this and you live in the U.S., I'm sorry they have to go through all this. It's not fun. It's terrible, honestly. I mean, it was like watching a damn film, seeing what's going on, seeing live on YouTube what was going on, happening, crazy. But yeah, I hope you're doing well anyway, and I guess we'll see what happens. That's all I can say. And also, before we get into the interview with Matt, I'd love for you to check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just click the link and enter your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. And if you join the Audio Tribe, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public, also a chance to ask up-and-coming guests questions, and a lot more cool stuff I want to do in the future as we grow and grow. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on Apple Podcasts, love you to hit subscribe. We're growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you. So I really appreciate your support. It's awesome to see you guys coming on board and joining and watching, and hopefully enjoying the content as well, the interviews. But that's it for promotional stuff. Let's get into the interview with Matt Wallace. So yeah, man, thank you very much. I've been obviously, I think everyone has been following what's going on in the U.S., but it just, I don't know how you
Yeah,
guys deal with it. But every time I wake up and I see the news, like this,
yeah,
I don't know what to call him even, but this
yeah.
idiot, it's just
It's just terrible. The
doing.
problem is that it's terrible, and unfortunately, half of America agrees with him. So it's just shocking to be an American and to realize that this is the land we live in. Because I didn't think it was like this, but it obviously is like this. So it's
Hmm.
unfortunate. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know what to do. Half of America agrees with them, which is shocking.
I know. It's
It's just horrible. It's horrible.
how, what's the vibe? I mean, I guess are in LA, and I guess you guys are pretty liberal as it is. But is is there tension? Like, can you feel it, or what's it like?
Yeah, well, there definitely is with people who are on the other side of the political divide. There's certainly tension. I mean, most, the coasts are always kind of cosmopolitan, and I think they're a little more forward thinking.
Mm,
New York and LA is more, people tend to be more democratic, and you can argue more liberal.
mm,
And the middle America is definitely more conservative and more Republican. And so it's just different worlds. And unfortunately, they have extremely different values.
yeah,
And unfortunately, sometimes religion factors into it too. So there's the religious right. There's the yeah. Anyway, it's just
the shit.
yeah. I just did not believe that this was who we are. But apparently this is what America is. So that's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah, I do hope it's gonna change, man. I mean, it's because the
Oh
whole
yeah.
world is looking at U.S. as the leader. I don't know if it's still as prevalent today, but
Yeah.
it still has an importance.
Yeah, it is. I think it'll be better. Biden, is a different kind of president. He's already elected, a lot of people who are either, African American, or they're
Mm, mm.
Hispanic, or they're, women. There's a gay man. So I think he's much more part of that democratic, process where America, the people that he has elected to his cabinet, reflect what America is. Whereas Trump is just all about, white men, and that's just not what it's not what the world is about. It's also not what America's about. So
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
how have you been during lockdown? How's it been for you?
Oh, well, it's not good because people are reluctant to work, and
Mm,
I finally worked with a band about a month ago, the first time in 6 months, because COVID is a real thing, and our hospitals right now are filled up here, and America is a leader in the world in having more COVID cases than anybody else. So that's
mm.
how we lead. Yeah, so, yeah, that's just the way it is. So yeah, I mean we have where it's definitely more challenging now, and so with the hospitals filled up, it's hard. They can't admit other people, so people have to really be more careful. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't careful, especially I don't want to generalize, but people who are Republican tend to think you don't need to wear a mask, and they don't think you need to be safe. And I've Republican friends who are traveling, not wearing masks, doing everything you're not supposed to do. And of course, they
Mm.
are also the ones who are getting COVID too. So there you go. That's how that goes. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's stupid, to be honest.
yeah,
But it's so not funny is not the right word at all. But having spoken to other people in the music industry, whatever they're doing, like some people have been like myself. I've been really affected by the COVID situation. There's been no work essentially. But then you have some people who have been really busy, like it's taken off almost. Where have you
yeah.
fallen in there, and how have you
Uh,
dealt with
I
it?
mean, I was definitely I was doing a bunch of mixing. Hang on, someone's knocking at my
Yeah,
door. Excuse me a second.
no
Sorry.
worries.
Um, yeah, I'm on. I'm on an interview. What's up? Oh, I'll talk to you later. Okay, cool. Thanks. Sorry about that.
No problem, man.
Right, guys. So yeah, I mean, I was busy doing a lot of international mixing. That was really fun. So doing that, and things were slow. And then I worked with a band. That was cool. But we had to wear masks and try to do it more safely. So
Hmm.
yeah. So what are you? So are you a musician, or are you in the publishing business? What is it that you do?
So engineering as well, working with bands, and it was mostly live gigs for the last,
Oh,
not this year, but the year before.
right.
But I also had a lot of sessions or
Yeah.
just bands who couldn't get into the studio, to record because of the situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's tough.
yeah,
Yes.
it's been a bit shit for many of us, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, all the all the bands I know, they're of course, no one's touring, so you just
Yeah.
can't tour right now till I think it's going to be at least June, July, August at the very least. Other people estimate maybe not even until 2022.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I heard too. I mean, most likely Glastonbury is going to get cancelled any day now, probably, and every other festival as well, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It's just not safe. And when I heard a couple of these people talking, who are like well-known agents, and they just said they were saying 2022 because no, at least in America, no place there's no one that will underwrite the insurance to have people at a gig because it'd be too easy to go to a gig and blame the gig for how you got COVID. And so
you gotta
a lot of
protect
people
yourself.
say, yeah. So that's what they're doing. But that's good that you were doing live sound and doing recording. That's good.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
nice.
yeah, it's really enjoyable. But having moved here, I'm not gonna really pick up live gigs again. It takes too long to get into that circuit. I just do a home studio situation
Right.
instead.
Right. So you said you were living in Leeds. Now you're living somewhere else.
Oh no, we lived in London for the
And then now
last.
you're
Now moved
right.
to Leeds. Yeah. But yeah, like we just said, there's no work at all in live
Yeah.
gigs anymore. So there's no point in really looking
Yeah.
for it at the moment either. But I'll
Yeah.
be okay. I'm
Yeah.
sure of it.
Where and so are you originally from some part of Scandinavia? Where are you from? Or Germany?
Yeah.
Or
No, Sweden.
oh yeah, nice. Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
hear it?
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, I was trying to figure out. You're trying to pick out your where your accent was from, and I it sounded Scandinavia. I wasn't sure if it was Swedish or if it was from Norway or something like that. So yeah, good.
Nice. Have you
Well,
been to
your English
Scandinavia?
is what's that?
Have you
What's your
been to
question?
Sweden or
Not
Norway,
yet. I was
Denmark?
supposed to go this last July. I was supposed to go to Finland and Norway because my girlfriend she has family out there, so we were supposed to go there, but the travel was of course canceled because of COVID. We were all ready to go, and yeah, she has her family that lives up in Rovaniemi, which is the northern part of Finland, part of near the Arctic Circle. We were supposed to go there, then go to Norway and stuff like that, but anyway, didn't
Right.
unfortunately.
Hopefully you can go next year or the
I
year
hope
after.
so. So, what made you decide to move from there to England? Was this
Well,
work?
yeah, I mean, actually, first I wanted to go to US to study audio too.
Right.
Then I had a friend here in UK who said, "Oh, it's much easier being Swedish, getting work in because, well, now UK just left the European Union,
Right.
but before that, it was you can just go anywhere in Europe and work without visa. So that's why I got to UK.
Gotcha. Oh, right. That's right. 'Cause it was part. It was part of the. Yeah. Well, isn't that something? That's. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. England, the UK didn't weren't very smart with that either. I mean, that was not a very good move on their part. Really wasn't.
exactly.
It was bad.
It was bad. I mean,
Yeah.
we're still figuring out what's going to happen. I think.
It's a
Uh,
mess. It's too bad. They should have stuck with it because, we're such an interconnected society. I mean, it's a world market, and every country is connected to every country now, and so it makes more sense to keep those borders open and keep people more connected. I think ultimately, but yeah, interesting. Yeah, people get so afraid of, immigrants or whatever they're afraid of, and they just kind of lose their sense of what's the good way to move forward. But anyway, what can you do?
exactly. I mean, the stupid thing here in England is that a lot of people who voted for Brexit probably goes to Spain every bloody year just to, go to warmer
Right.
weather. But so it
Right.
just doesn't really make
Yeah.
sense to be scared of immigrants and blame the immigrants and all that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy on so many levels. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it is.
So do you have any music questions or production
Yeah, I
or?
mean, let's just keep the conversation flowing.
Yeah.
I was actually listening to because I've heard Faith No More, but before talking to you,
Yeah.
before researching about you, I knew Epic, the song Epic,
Yeah.
but I never listened to Angel Dust before, and that was a trip. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, that was a big record. It was big overseas, not so much in the States, but in England it was really big. Yeah,
Yeah,
you, do
yeah.
you ever read Kerrang magazine?
No, but I saw the title it gave the
Yeah,
record.
they gave because I remember when they had come out, I'd seen that magazine. It said, most influential records of all time. This is like what 10, 15 years ago, and I was looking through in the 50s. I thought maybe one of my records would be in the 50s. And I looked in the 40s, and once I got to the 30s, I thought, well, there's no way any of my records made it into this, best records. And then they put Angel Dust as number one because it influenced so many bands. I mean, I've met with and talked to bands, whether it's Korn or Hoobastank or I mean, just so many bands. That's the record for them that really are them. So, has it frozen? Oh, something froze there. Are you still hearing me? Oh, we're back. Yeah, there
Yeah,
you go.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It cut up there for some
yeah.
weird reason. But yeah, do you mind saying it? You said you influenced bands like Korn.
Yeah, Korn and Hoobastank. There's a bunch of bands I end up talking to. Oh, System of a Down. I had so many people call me up, after Angel Dust, just because that was the record that really defined, I think, just there's something about that record that was really groundbreaking. I think in the way that the music was approached, and certainly the vocals and the lyrics. So, but I had lots of bands who got my home. So anyway, so that was I think whereas Epic and the album The Real Thing made a bigger impact in the States and was very popular. I think Angel Dust was much bigger, certainly in England, and I think in most of Europe it was a bigger record. Sold more over there.
It was such an interesting record, like, because obviously the genre metal, funk, or funk metal, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if I mean it's been there before, I guess, but that was such an album that really had songs that were really metal and really funky. You know, that was it's very progressive, that album.
Yeah, yeah, and that record, Angel Dust, was a response to not being a funk metal band. Whereas I think we were accused of being the first real funk metal band, certainly on the radio for the Real Thing, but Angel Dust, we really went away from that. So a lot of that is not that kind of music, and that was a very planned approach with the band. They really wanted to get away from that. Also, I wanted to get away from the sonics of the Real Thing and make a different sounding record for Angel Dust.
I mean, yeah, the sound is very interesting on the record. Like, I think I mean I heard you speak about the production a bit on that record, but especially the vocals are they're very, I mean, raw compared to today. Obviously, there's no tuning or anything like that that I could hear, and it's very raw, which is I miss that a lot in today's record, because now everything just sounds the same, you know.
That's the unfortunate aspect of having, being able to tune vocals means that people do tune vocals whether you need to or not. So, yeah, but yeah, I didn't do any tuning on that record, and also didn't do any tuning on the first Maroon 5 record. When I mixed that album, there was no tuning on that. I think when they remixed the single, they probably tuned it, but that whole record was done without any tuning. So, but with the Faith No More stuff, we didn't have tuning available. At least with Maroon 5, we had it available, but we chose not to use it.
Right. But when did autotune really become available for you guys? Was it early 2000 or even mid-90s?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was around by 2000 or so. Because I know that whoever remixed "This Love" by Maroon 5, I know they had tuned that one, or "She Will Be Loved." I remember that they had done some tuning. So I think it had to be around that time, early 2000. So even though I didn't use it when I mixed it, I think other people probably did. So because I was not really a fan of it, but I understand its place in pop music.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's so fun when you hear older records, when you actually hear the personality, because and I've spoken a lot about this on this podcast, and maybe I'm repeating myself, but I just miss the personality in music. Even just take any pop song or artist, it just sounds boring,
Well, yeah, I think what people are missing is that just because you can tune something doesn't mean you should. And a lot of the style of singers in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s was how they got to a note. And if someone started flat and you sharped up to it, there was a tension and release. And also the phrasing. A person's phrasing is also their style. And so with auto-tune and with Pro Tools, you can take anybody off the street, you can put them in perfectly in tune, you can put them perfectly in time, but that's not really what makes it a human or interesting vocal. And I think that, to me, great records aren't perfect records. Great records are records that are just great, but they're not because they're perfect. There's something about them that is alive.
Definitely. But how do you try to incorporate that in your work now, if you do? I mean, I guess it depends on the client too. But is that something you try to keep, like the personality?
I do it. I mean, a friend of mine taught me how to auto-tune, because I avoided it for a long time, and he finally said, "Listen, you got to learn how to do this." So I did it. The advantage of doing it is that I can also now tune it the way I like to tune things, which is I like good relative tuning. Like I like the whole thing to be in relative tune, not like spot on tune. So if there's a note that feels out in context with the rest of the vocal, then I like to fix that. But I prefer not to tune things. I mean, when I do tune things, people, I like to think that a lot of the stuff I've done in recent years is more natural sounding, so that it just sounds like it's a better version of a vocal, instead of like, oh my God, that's like super tune. You know what I mean? So I really try to avoid. Unless I'm like it, to me, hearing the humanity behind the speakers or the headphones, that's the important thing.
Exactly. And how do you approach drums, because that's always also big instruments that always also gets quantized
Yeah.
or fiddled with, you know.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I think well, for the most part, people want that stuff to quantize. So I do quantize. I have had some projects where we didn't quantize drums, which I prefer. But I think that the part of the problem is that it really depends on what kind of music you're making and what the aesthetic is. Because if you're going to do anything that involves loops, then you have to quantize the drums. And if people are going to do any kind of programming and they want to cut and paste and move things around, then I think the quantization of drums is almost expected these days because people tend to copy and paste, which I'm not a big fan of, but they do that whether it's drum, guitars or bass or vocals. But also, like I said, if you're doing loops and things like that, then you have to be quantized, just to make everything will kind of work out. So, not my favorite things. I made so many records before any of this stuff was available. So, you
yeah.
know,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, where do you think that's? I mean, and it might be a lame question, always asking where do you think it's going, but do you see any signs of something changing in that aspect of record making?
it really depends on what the artists want to convey and what the listeners want to listen for, because you can use Pro Tools strictly as a recording device, like a say a 24 track tape machine. You can use it just to record and not actually repair anything. You can use it and not put things in time and not put things in tune if you really want to. But I do think that there's a way that people make music today that does tend to be a little more cookie cutter, a little more repetitive, and just I think it's quicker and easier just to like sing one chorus and just copy it and paste it in all the other choruses. I think, whereas I think for me, part of the whole approach to analog recording was the way the person sang the first chorus had a certain level of energy. Second chorus might have more, but the last chorus was definitely different. It was a different singing approach. They would push harder. They would sing with more energy or things like that. And I think that was really important. Whereas nowadays, everyone's just kind of used to hearing the same chorus vocal again and again. They're just kind of used to it. So it's just different than where I came up from analog, so I just came from a different place. So,
But is there anything a producer or engineer can do to maybe get that feeling? But now, even though it's a lot of copying and pasting
mhm.
happening.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it. I mean, if you if the producer wants to, she wants to tune the vocals so you can make it, good tuning, but not like robotic tuning. You can do that. Same thing with quantizing drums. You can do that too. You can quantize just the quarter notes if you want, so that the kick and the snare are on, and the hi-hats and the cymbals kind of move around. There's different ways you can do it. It just depends on what people want to do. I think the problem is that once you quantize one thing, you almost end up quantizing everything. That's the problem with a lot of modern recording, is that if you put the drums in perfect timing and the bass isn't spot on, then you need to put the bass in time. Then you put the guitars in. So it's honestly, it's a real an issue of confidence as an artist, how much you want to be genuine or how much you want to adhere to the norms. And if you're confident, because I've had to argue with artists and bands about this, where I say, leave notes in there a little bit flat or sharp, or things that are a little out of time or tune, and it's really a fight to do that. And generally later on they'll agree with me and say that was a good idea. I'm glad we did that, because sometimes the job as a producer is what mistakes you leave in. And so I really want to leave things in so that when you hear it, you can hear the humanity behind the speakers. And I just think that I'd like things to sound like they're performed by humans. And part of the problem with making quantized and perfect records is that once you go to a live show, then of course you need to play backing tracks and you need to use a pre-recorded vocal, and you got to do all these things that just, you're basically going to a show and you're basically hearing the playback of the actual record you listen to, which is different than a performance, where in the olden days you'd see a performance. Some nights bands were not very good, and some nights the bands were exceptional. I mean, I think Zeppelin, I think all the great bands had on and off nights, and when they hit it was like, oh my god. But that's just I think people today expect everything to be in tune and in time all the time. So
Yeah, I mean, I've seen shows here in the UK, in London, like where it is a lot of that thing where they play to a backing track live as well, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
true. It loses the magic, I guess, but
yeah.
it's a shame. I just wonder if it's because music has gotten to the place it's gotten to, where it is, a commodity, where it is, well, I don't know how to explain it, but like how the today's hits sound like, like what the labels are looking for, I guess, too. I don't know if it all adds up to these always having to be perfect, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what it seems like. Because to me, when I was growing up, listening to like radio in the '70s and things like that, and even into the '80s, I remember being able to hear like different genres of music on certain pop radio stations, where you'd hear like a good country song and a good rock song, and or a good R&B song. They're all on the same radio station, and to me, that was really interesting to hear different kinds of music. Whereas nowadays, things are so compartmentalized, and each radio station plays like a certain specific kind of music, and they have a certain specific playlist, and I don't know. I just think we miss out on things. I mean, to me, one of the things that there every once in a while there'll be something that will kind of jump out of from like that Gotye song, Somebody I Used to Know. That was a song that came out of nowhere, and it sounded really unique, and it was like what the but it made an impact, and it became like it became a hit, and it's not arranged like a hit. Only has two choruses. It's got unique instrumentation. I think the same thing could be said of Lord's breakthrough song Royals. That was just like, what was that? You know what I mean? And that, to me, those moments are what make things exciting. But I think things are even more homogenized now than when those things came out. I think now when I hear the radio, things are super duper duper similar, and I think it's nice to have something that breaks out of the norm and you go, wow, that was really unexpected,
Exactly.
So,
It
yeah.
reminds me because I spoke to Michael Beinhorn in the past summer, and he was saying something really interesting about that people always reference the Beatles or Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones as the greats, and he was basically sick of that. He think we should have been able to move past that. We should be able to reference other bands,
Sure.
and I
We
find
should.
that really. I mean, I find it true. It's been really interesting because I wish there was people pushing stuff
Yeah.
further. Maybe there are. I'm just not aware
Yeah.
of it.
But I think it's really interesting that people reference the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, because if you listen to those records, there are out of tune moments all over the place. There are out of time moments. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, really something when you really listen. There's some exceptionally pitchy vocal recordings there, and some really things that are sketchy in tuning. And there's some hits where you go, "Oh my God, that guitar is really out of tune," but people just didn't hear that back then. And also, to me, one of the things I really fight against a lot with people when we talk about gear and equipment, they always talk about like vintage guitars or vintage amplifiers, and part of the thing is what they forget is that both the Stones and the Beatles, they use like Epiphone guitars or K guitars, or just really knockoff, not great guitars. And when they did use a good, say like a Ludwig drum kit or a Gibson guitar, those instruments were not vintage when they used them. They were brand new. And so people like this idea of vintage guitars or vintage stuff, but it's like it has. I don't like. I argue with people about this all the time. I think that has so little to do with any of this stuff. I think it's really about. I think 85% of the sound is from fingertips and vocal cords. I really believe that it's all about the musician, how he or she creates the music, and the actual instrument is just absolutely secondary. But I argue with people about this all the time, and it is interesting that, like Beinhorn says, excuse me, that people reference stuff that just was not in tune or in time. Reference all the time, and yeah, he's right. Like, yeah, are there any newer bands that people can reference like that? And I think it's a good point that he's brought up.
Definitely. But I think you also bring up a good point there. Like we do reference that music because I think that's what really maybe felt like music, and it might be a lame
Yeah,
argument, but I think it has some validity to it. Because I've been wondering this for myself for years now, like why I'm always drawn to older, even just go back to the 90s, even early
yeah,
2000. I
hmm
always go back to that music because somehow it resonates more, even if it's pop. So I don't really
hmm
know. I think that's why, like what you
yeah.
just mentioned.
I think now that we're talking about it, I think there's a lot more humanity. The further back you go in the music, there's more humanity. I think that I've tried to explain this to young bands when I talk to them. I said, that when you listen to an old Beatles record or Rolling Stones or something like that, that's basically like a photograph of a band. Like those bands generally, they played in the studio the way they played on stage. Like, you heard the record, you hear them on stage, like, pretty similar. Obviously, not with the exception of a lot of production elements, but generally, when someone walked into a room, they had to be able to play and nowadays it's like really pixelated, fine point. Every recording, like you record a musician at a time, and then once they're done, then you go and you put them in time and in tune. And so there's all this effort to do this, whereas in the old days, someone played and there was their sound and that was done, and you move forward. And I just think it's a different era right now. I just think you had to really be able to, like, I've got some of the copies of some of the master recordings of like Led Zeppelin's A Whole Lot of Love. Man, you listen to that track, it's just blistering. It's so amazing. But there's like sketchy stuff all over it, but it just doesn't matter. I mean, there's sketchy recording techniques, there's some sketchy notes here and there, but it's just really, really, really exciting, you know. And I think and I think the one thing I have talked about a lot with people, and that is the better the technology gets, the worse the musicianship gets.
Yeah.
Because you can repair it. Whereas back in the old days of analog tape, if you couldn't play it, there's nothing you could do with analog tape to make it sound like you could play, because it's like you can just listen to it, because tape is very unforgiving. And when you play back a guitar performance or a drum performance, like, better play it again. Whereas with Pro Tools, like, okay, you guys get lunch and I'll fix this up. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people are lazier as musicians, and listeners expect much, much, much better tuning and timing. And so, because the technology can provide that, the musicians don't have to. And by doing that and making it perfect, you miss what's really interesting about music, and that is the grace notes in between things, and how people get to their pitch center, how if they're sharp and then they flat, or if they're flat and then they sharp, or how someone sings behind the beat. You know, there are these things that you can do as a performer that you can make people lean forward, want you to do something, then you finally do it. It's that tension and release, and we have zero tension and release in music now, because people don't have the patience to wait for something that's like a little bit behind the beat, or someone's a little flat, and then all of a sudden they hit the note. You go, thank goodness, there it is, you know. And I just think that people want instant perfection, and they don't want greatness, and that's just how it is, unfortunately. You know.
Yeah, very good point, man. And I completely agree. You mentioned something there. You know, people expect perfection nowadays, and an interesting, you know, point there is, I guess, that people do expect all that, but also like as you know and have experienced, is that budgets and money making records these days are getting less, but you still have to do more work. How have you dealt with all that? Because you've been with there the whole journey, obviously.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's really, really, truly horrible. I mean, you bring up a really valid point. That is that, yes, budgets have gotten much, much smaller. And now as a producer, engineer, I have to basically correct everybody's performance. Like in the old days, we'd record someone's performance, and that was it. Okay, that's all we got. Great. But nowadays they do their thing, and then they leave, and then I spend more time fixing and putting things in time. And it's just, and doing it for a lot less money. So the whole thing's just, the music, making music, recording music these days is not nearly as enjoyable as it used to be. There used to be, you could make a decent living at it, and people were more prepared when they came in the studio, and there was less expected in terms of creating performances. You know what I mean? Like nowadays, you have to create performances out of people. If they can't play, you have to do it by putting them in time, or, you know, putting them in tune, you know. So that's kind of a challenge these days, where you have to do all this extra work. In the analog days, after you went into record and you came out of record, that was it. Nowadays, you go into record and you come out of record, but then you have to do a lot of fixing, and that's the problem. And everyone expects it. And yes, I think your point is well taken, that even if I do a record for low money, it has to sound as good as the most expensive records made.
Exactly.
And that's just terrible. I mean, it's really terrible, because, you know, those people have a lot more time, energy, money, you know, big teams of people that can pull that together. And you know, me as a singular person have to create that stuff out of you know, it's a lot more effort to pull that off. Yeah.
But
you know, it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you. I have some of these master multi-tracks of some of these bands and stuff like that. And I have to say, what's really impressed me, and I've never been the biggest Coldplay fan, but I have to say I've listened to some of those master recordings, and they don't tune his vocals on some of these singles, and it is so refreshing to listen to it. Go, oh my God, he's sharp, he's flat, but there it is, and it's really, really, really refreshing. Nice. You know, I'm not sure about the most recent stuff, but stuff from there is like from say 5-10 years ago. Definitely has not been auto-tuned or melodyne, and it's like, oh my God, it's really refreshing, because, you know, if you go out there with momentum and and in 10, you can kind of win over anybody, even if you're sharp or flat. If it's a great song, most people don't even pay attention to that stuff. Honestly, they really don't.
Exactly, and yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah,
Totally
yeah,
right.
yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, going back to the budget and stuff, and being less money, etc. Uh, how has that affected your like work life, like maybe even work, not like work and private life, I should say. Has like how you ridden the wave of maybe sometimes busy, sometimes less busy. How do you deal
Uh-huh.
with all that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely there's two elements. One is that yes, sometimes I'm busy with a project and sometimes I'm not. Um, but the thing that's more challenging is that once I had success with, say, Faith No More and Maroon 5, I could hire engineers. So I could be a producer and I could sit back and listen to what everyone's doing. And unfortunately nowadays I'm back to where I started, 35 years ago, where I'm the producer, I'm the engineer, I'm the assistant engineer, I'm the tuner, and I'm the guy who puts in the drums in time, because we don't have enough budget for me to hire anybody. But even as recent as 5-7 years ago, I used to have like two different engineers on any project. I'd have two rooms going, and we would make records pretty quickly, and it was really exciting to keep that momentum. And I could listen to what they did in one room, then go hear guitars in the other room, and I had engineers that worked with me, and we had a great team. And I really missed. Also, it's also a lot more lonely making records now. In the old days, you would be in a big studio facility, you'd run into people that and you say, how's it going? And then you go into your room, and then you've got your engineer there, you got people working with you, and it was very social. And it was very, like I say, it was very, collaborative. And nowadays, all my peers I talk to, all the engineers and producers I know, we're all in the same thing. We're all in our own little space, whether people have a garage set up or set up in a guest house, or they have their own studio. And so everybody's working by themselves and doing a lot more work and for less money.
Mm, exactly. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
And have you ever thought about doing something else at some point? Did you just feel
Oh,
like, because
cool.
I felt that I mean, I have not been in the industry for long at all, like not even
Yeah,
close
yeah,
to where you have been in, but I've asked myself, is it worth it? Not that I'm looking to be a millionaire, but
right.
because like we said, you put a lot of hours in, especially if you work in a studio. It's like 12 hours a day, every bloody day.
Mhm.
And the return is not so great, and you sacrifice a lot, like a lot of family stuff, a lot of
Yes,
personal health. Like I've seen, I guess
yes,
you have seen this too, where
yes.
the health just
Yeah.
deteriorates. So,
Yeah. Well, those are valid points. I mean, there's a couple of issues. So also, one of the nice things, once I had been established, I was able to hire engineers so I could go home and see my family. Like when my kids were younger, I would
hmm.
say, okay, 7 o'clock, I'm going to go and do family time. And I would either come back, 2 hours or 3 hours later, we work till midnight, or sometimes I just say, okay, listen, you guys do some more guitar stuff and I'll see you in the morning. And I would work like a half day on Saturday, and that was really, really, really nice to have some kind of life. And another thing that people don't think about, when say if you have some kind of success as a producer or engineer, uh, let's say you in one year you make $100,000 or whatever, and people go, oh my god, that's really amazing. I go, okay, yeah, but here's the thing, I put in twice as many hours as people do when they do a 40-hour work week. So honestly, if you had two jobs, like if you did a job that you work for 8 hours, another job that you work for another, you'd make the same amount of money, honestly, in any profession. And so people in the music business, and certainly probably movies as well, they think that you make a lot of money. But the fact of the matter is, you also put in 12 plus hours a day, 6 days a week, and so of course you're going to make more money because you're also putting in a lot more time. I did a project with an artist about a year and a half ago. We worked 21 days straight. I had one Sunday off.
Right, right.
You know, And I mean, fortunately, my kids are older, so they don't really care. But when you're younger, it's really important. And I really had to fight for that. Where where bands, it took them a while to get used to the idea that I was going to go home. Even on the Maroon 5 record, they were like, "Well, are you going to go home for family time?" It's like, yeah, because if I don't, I'm going to quit. I won't do this job anymore if I can't. Because otherwise, I have friends who would only see their family on Sundays. You
Hmm.
know, and I have a number of friends, because they would wake up after the kids already went to school. They would come home after the kids have already gone to bed, and they would work on Saturdays. So only Sundays they saw their families. I said, you know what? I won't do this job if
Hmm.
that's be the case because it's not worth it. You give up an awful lot to be in the music business, to be in entertainment business. You give up a lot. Unless you make it to the top and you make a lot of money, then you hire a bunch of people to work underneath you, and then it's not so bad. But for a lot of us, those days have gone, and so now we're all back to, doing all the work ourselves 6 days a week, and that's unfortunate because the budgets are lower, everything's and they want you to do a lot more. It's not. I would never recommend to anybody to go in the music business personally. I would never ever recommend anyone go into either as a musician or even as an engineer producer, because I just think that the odds are very slim that you're going to make money at it as a musician. And as a producer engineer, you have to work a long time for no money before you finally make a little bit of money. I starved for years when I started. I was super poor when I started, and I was working long hours then, but until I finally, had some successful records. But I think that you give up an awful lot, you really do. And if you have a 9-to-5 job, you see your family every night and you see people on the weekends, and it's a much more humane way to live a life,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for saying all that, because it really resonates with me too, and I definitely agree. And something I've been thinking a lot about when it comes to this people working so late or so many hours, etc., etc. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I always wondered, and also from what I saw in studios, is like people seem very scared, as in scared of either maybe losing a particular gig, or scared of that they've reached a certain point, and God forbid if there's one slip up, the whole career will fall apart. They feel like a lot of people live on that edge. Am I wrong, or have you?
No, I think that's a valid thing. I think that can happen. And what's also interesting, for me in particular, doing the first Maroon 5 record that was really, really successful, it was interesting and disappointing that I didn't have the option to work with them again. Because say if you did that in the 70s or 80s or even the 90s, if you had a record that successful, you would absolutely work on the next record. Even out of superstition, like record labels would be superstitious, like we got to do that again. And it was really interesting to do a record that big and not even be considered for the second record. And I know they worked with multiple people who they're all really talented. Spike Stant, Mark Endert, and Mike Elizondo, and people like that. All very talented people, but it's interesting that I didn't have the opportunity to maybe even do a couple tracks on that, or even be sought after as a producer. You know what I mean? And like I say, in the olden days, you would be guaranteed a record. If you had a record that sold over 1 million records, you were guaranteed to do the next record. Unless you really pissed off the band, and you were, at odds, or the label didn't like you as a person. But so it's interesting. I think there's less loyalty in that in the current climate, and that's fine. I think it's good that bands can pick out whoever they want to use. That makes sense. But it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And so how come they didn't choose you again? Was it just to want to try something else? That was it, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I just want to try other things, which all that stuff makes sense. It really does. But again, for looking at it from the band's perspective, it makes sense, and they have to be able to do what they want to do and what feels right for them. I think that's really important. But I do think that it's interesting that from the perspective of a producer who produced a record that was that successful, I think it was fascinating. There wasn't even a discussion of, if not doing the whole record, but maybe participating in some of the songs, because they had like 3 or 4 different producers. And so at that point in time, you could just say, hey, Matt, do 1 or 2 songs. Again, I'm still going by the old thing where people, you got the next record if you had a record that successful. So it was just, it's a more of an interesting observation on my part.
Yeah. And how did you, because I think if I was in your situation, in that situation, I would probably take it personal. But in this industry, I guess you need to have thick skin. So you don't strike me as a person who would really be downstricken by something like that.
No. For me, no. I understand it. I have I think a strong enough sense of self that I understand those things, and I think people have to do what they have to do, and I understand. Like if I was in a band, I'd probably want to try different producers too. So all that makes sense. So for me, it's not about it was just curious to me that's how it went, because what makes it interesting to me is as I was growing up as a producer, every time I saw a producer have a successful record, it was like guaranteed they'd do the next record. So I had that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, if I have a successful record, then I'm going to do this next record. That's just how it's going to go. And so to see that go differently, I think it's just a sign of the times of that era, where I do think people decide they want to try different people or multiple producers on a record.
Mm.
In the old days, it would just be one producer. Nowadays, a lot of pop records are multiple producers. That's just a different style.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, we spoke about money and stuff and budgets and stuff. What's your approach to charge clients? Do you have like if a band comes to you, do you immediately ask what their budget is, or what's your process to find the best way for you and the band?
I think there's two ways to approach things. One is you can just talk to a band and speak only about aesthetics and what kind of record you want to make, and just speak purely on creative terms. And that's one approach. The other approach is to start off by just saying, well, let's see if your budget's anywhere near what amount of money I think I can make the record for. You know what I mean? Because the problem I've had in the past is like I've met with people or talked to them and you're like, oh my God, you'd be perfect for this record. Oh my God, this is so great. Like we speak the same language, and you find out the budget's just like nothing. And then it's like, well, it does feel like a bit of a waste of time sometimes if you don't get to the money thing earlier on. And I for years would never want to even broach that subject with artists. I'd rather just talk about the creative aspects and let my manager handle all the financial things. But nowadays, I think it's important to get people's expectations about budget on the table much sooner, only because the budgets are smaller. In the olden days, the budgets were always pretty healthy, and so if you $10,000 or $20,000 either way, you're like, okay, that's fine. But nowadays, $10,000 or $20,000 either way can be a third of the budget, or half the budget. I mean, it just depends. So it's just a different era now. So I think the budget has to come up, and look, this whole idea of budget really came up for me 15 years ago when my manager said I should set up my own studio, and I didn't want to have a recording studio, but he said, well, if you want to put money in your pocket, you need your own studio, because I'd done a couple of projects where once you paid for the tracking studio and the overdub studio and the engineer, I had a couple of projects, one in particular that had $0 for the producer, because everything else was spent out. And so by having my own studio, I can fold in the cost of, studio time and my abilities as a producer all kind of get put together. So that way it's the only way to make money, honestly, these days. You actually have to have a studio, because with the budgets there are these days, I can't afford to go to any other studio and work. I just can't even afford it. Right. I think the top 1% in the recording business can certainly do that, but I think most of the rest of us just can't afford it.
Yeah, it's a shame, but yeah, I see a lot of people having their own studios these days. It seems to be the way to go. Like so many places in London have been closing. Even a studio I was working in, sadly, closed. It's
but
shame.
But it's sad because in the olden days, you could go to a bigger studio, and when there were big budgets, you could go to a bigger studio and move in for 2 or 3 months and just work there. You could afford to do that. Or at the very least, you could go to a big studio for $1,500 or $2,000 a day and work for, say, a week or two and track all the drums, then go to a smaller studio and do the overdubs. And then you could camp out an overdub studio for like $1,000 a day or so, and it wouldn't be a problem, and so, but nowadays, I go into a big studio for like 2 days or 3 days. That's it. So I go there, we track drums, and we come to my studio, we do everything else. Right. If you want to get that, but I can do drums at my place too. But it's nice to go to a bigger studio, and but again, you used to go 2 or 3 months. Now it's 2 or 3 days, and so I think it's harder to make money if you own a larger studio, unless you're working with the very, very top clientele who have bigger budgets. But otherwise, just it's just not a viable way to make records anymore.
Definitely. But how do you structure the whole thing with your manager Frank? Like, have you told him like I won't ever go below this budget, or how have you set that whole thing up?
Yeah, I mean, I've done that for mixing, because I've done that where I'll mix like super cheap for people, just because we want to, I want to keep working, and I like to work. So I have like a certain low number, but after that I won't go any lower. It's after, because at a certain point in time, it really isn't worth my time, because if it gets to be too inexpensive. Here's another thing too. Part of the problem is that the less money someone pays you, it's almost like they expect you to do more work.
Yeah.
Where when people pay me like a lot of money, they go, just mix it, and then you mix it, and they go, sounds great. And then someone pays you a little bit of money, and then they go, okay, now can we do another revision? And then you're into like 15, 20 revisions. And so to me, part of the challenge is I think that in a weird way, people think you're worth less when you charge less. Like you're trying to be a team player and charge less money so they can afford you. But then I think that people perceive you as going, well, you're not worth that much, so now we're going to make you do all this work, Or I've had things where people say, can you mix this? And I start mixing, and they go, oh, yeah, those vocals need tuning. Can you tune them? Like, or can you put those drums in time? And so nowadays I go, you're paying me to mix. Anything beyond that, you can have somebody else do that work, or you can hire me and I will put things in time or tune them. But I'm here to mix. That's it. And yeah, so yeah, I mean, I amend my budget, depending, like if I'm working for a major label, that's a certain kind of budget. If I'm doing an independent label, that's a certain budget. If people are paying me out of their own pocket, then that's another budget. So. I think that most of us in the business will work on a sliding scale depending on what people can afford,
Right.
And which is, in the olden days, you would just say, here's what I charge, and you'd get paid. But nowadays, if you want to continue working, you do need to be flexible. So, and again, you're getting more money, but you also have to do a lot more work. I mean, you're getting less money, you have to do a lot more work. So
it's so fascinating what you said about if you charge less, people actually demand more of you, and that's really, I think it's really valuable for people to hear, because I think it's so I don't know the word I'm looking for, but so common for people to be like, oh, I work for anything, but they don't actually know you're just devaluing yourself.
Yeah. At a certain point in time, if I do work for too low money, I can really just go work at a McDonald's or somewhere else, because it does get to the point where the money is getting that for the amount of time you put in. And the problem with these mixes these days, you really have to do a lot of work. Like say back in the days of 24 track, you had 24 faders, and you push it up, and it would be a drum set, a couple of guitars, bass, maybe a keyboard track, and some background vocals. The problem nowadays is that it's not uncommon to get mixes where you have 100 to 150 plus tracks. Okay, so there's a lot more tracks. And then the other problem is this: they go, oh yeah, that guitar's just a DI, so just maybe mess around with a plugin and you just come up with a different sound. It's like, well, wait a second. Now I'm basically producing, because now I'm actually choosing the guitar sounds for you. And in the analog world, when you made a commitment, that sound was on tape, and the only thing you could do to that sound was you could EQ it, you could add compression or reverb, but that was it. But nowadays people go, oh, I want it to sound cleaner, or I want it to sound dirtier. It's like, well, I've had mixes where people send me stuff with 4 different microphones for each guitar pass, on separate tracks, and go ahead and blend them. It's like, blend them? No, I'm going to pick one mic from each one, because I'm not going to spend time blending it. You should have blended it, But there's a lot more work in mixing now, where I think people have basically postponed decisions. Like when you're working in analog, if you work on 24 track or 16 or 8 or 4 track, you need to commit to the sound, because it is going on tape just like that. And so now that you can do 150, 200 tracks, now it's like, oh yeah, everything's separated out, and we can change the sound of everything. I even had when people send the MIDI of the keyboard, go, just try some different sounds. Like, no. Send me the sound you want, I'll mix it. But otherwise, no. I'm just no. And especially when when you start charging less money and they want you to do things like that, then it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I think part of the problem is that because a lot of people have the idea that music is free, like you can download music for free on the internet, they feel that it doesn't cost anything to make it. And if they think that it costs anything to make it, then they're not going to pay you a fair wage to make that kind of music. It's like, well, but I can get it for free. It's like, I know, but somebody put a lot of time into that, and somebody hopefully paid for studio time or musicians or something to create that. And I know you can get it for free, but it's not really how it works, And that's a problem that I think with the advent of Napster and MP3s, and people could get free music on the internet, I think it did devalue music a lot, So once it became devalued, then the person who makes music, then they're devalued as well.
Exactly. But do you think we can bring value back to music?
Maybe. I don't know. I offhand I would say no, because I've even noticed it with friends of mine who do music for, say, commercials or music for movies, or they and even that is starting being devalued as well. you
Oh yeah.
know, that getting paid less and less and less. And I do think people even who are making movies and commercials are starting to realize, oh, I can get it for cheaper. I can get it for free. You know, it's like, not really, you know, but people do have that mentality. I think that is making it more and more difficult to charge money to, because, you know, producers and mixers like myself have experience and also have had success. And so you kind of hire someone like us who can kind of help you maybe have your best version of your music, you know, but, you know, and also, but you know, the flip side though, of course, is that people are making great music at home in their bedrooms on their computers. You know, I mean, so there's that too. So I mean, the flip side is that you can, in fact, like in the old days, it was a lot of money to buy studio equipment, and it was very, very, very expensive. Nowadays, you can have a computer, and you look at Billie Eilish and her brother. I mean, they made all that stuff, and you know, look at Lorde and her producer. They did it like in a small studio or a bedroom with you know, programming and stuff like that. So, and you also don't need big studios anymore. So the flip side is that you don't need that to make great music too. So
Yeah,
both those things kind of coexist.
I mean, there's so many positive things with the current, you know, technology
Sure.
being so cheap and accessible. But there was also something that was valuable with having labels being gatekeepers, you know,
Of
because
course. Yeah.
now it's very hard to discover new music without spending hours and hours
Yeah. Yeah.
sorting through stuff.
Do you know how many songs are uploaded every day to Spotify?
I know it's shitloads.
Yeah. Well, the last number I heard is they get 40,000 songs a day.
Wow.
So, like you say, at least with labels, whether they're evil or good, they at least were gatekeepers and at least funneled it so you could hear, here's Led Zeppelin, here's the Beatles, here's Tom Petty, here's whoever you want to talk about. And at least you could focus on like 10 different artists. Nowadays, it's really hard to find anything because there's just so much of it. You just don't even know where to start because it's like someone just dumping all this stuff on you. You're like, ah. And so, yeah, like, you know, if that number is true, 40,000 songs a day, you know, that, so the good news is that anybody can make music and they can do it on their computer at home. The bad news is that everybody can make music on their computers at home. And so now there's a lot of music out there.
Exactly,
So,
man.
yeah, it's good. It's good, bad. I mean, it's all good. I mean, anytime people can be creative, I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think that just in terms of artistry, it's really exciting. People can do that. I mean, as a professional who's done this for a long time, there are moments that, you know, make it less appealing to be in the business anymore because it's just harder to make a living at it. That's all.
But do you have something like, not that you want to quit the music, that's not what I mean, but do you have something else like you like to do
Oh,
besides
yeah.
music? Maybe you
Yeah,
are
yeah,
doing
yeah.
it?
My friends and I, we bought a house and we refurbished this 6,000 square foot house, and
Nice.
you know, we did it and did that. So yeah, I'll be doing more of that stuff too on my downtime. So in between projects, you know, if there's free time, I'll go work. I love working on houses and building stuff like that. I used to do that years ago. So
Nice.
to me, it's really creative. It's fun. And my friend Aaron really did. He and I used to make records together, and he's also does the building thing. And he said what's really gratifying is that when you put up a wall and when you're doing a building, there's no arguing about it. It's like there's a wall, yes. But when you write a chorus for a song, it's like, well, is this the right key? Oh, I don't know about that, this or that. And so you can change and change and change and change and change back and forth. And whereas when you build something, it's like, there it is. And that's it. And, you know, so there's something very, very rewarding about that. And also you don't have like, you know, 5 band members and a manager and A&R person, all these other people arguing about whether or not it's good. Because like, there's the wall, done. What's next? And that's really, really nice. And also it's nice that you only can work 8 hours a day doing this stuff. And you go home, you're like, oh, I have the rest of the evening off and I've got the weekend off. And it's really, really much more humane way to live, you know?
Definitely. I have to agree with you there. Like when someone, like the reference you did with walls and deciding about the chorus, it is so refreshing and just nice when you actually get to do something else that is not music, like you've been doing for so long, and
Yeah.
get a refresher almost, you know.
It's nice. And also there's nothing to argue about when you do that. Like, you know, it's just, there it is. You know, it's not subjective. Like music is so subjective that, you know, and I've had this happen where you work on something and you do everything and you even do things that you think that the artist or the band or the label wants, and they'll describe it like it has to be more vibe or more whatever terms they use to describe it. And you do all this work, and then 8 hours later you play it to them, they go, oh yeah, that's not quite what I was thinking. Maybe go back to what you had before. And you're like, so you go back and whereas, when you're building stuff, you just like build it and it's done. It's really exciting. It's lovely. And I like to work with my hands, and it's just, it's tactile and it's immediate. And at the end of the day, you go, oh, wow, look at this room. We built this room today. Great. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. It's really very forward moving and, just a lot fewer cooks in the kitchen. And,
Yeah, exactly, man. Well, I'm glad. It sounds enjoyable, actually.
Yeah, it's good. So I'll do that in between projects. So that's, that's
Nice.
what I'll do, just kind of keep things going.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, man, it was first of all a real pleasure having you on. But do you have like a favorite failure that happened maybe in real life, in studio, wherever you have been that set you up for later success?
That's a good question. I have to think about that one. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure of a favorite failure. I mean, there's been plenty of them along the way. I mean, yeah, there's no like specific failure, but there was a time when I made records, probably 80s and 90s, where I always, we would always like kind of stay in the budget and in the time frame, and we'd make records where everybody was kind of in their comfort zone. And I think I did a number of years of making like really like nice or good records, but they weren't great. And I think that the thing that I learned is that you're never going to make great records unless you're open to making shitty records and falling right on your face. You have to be so open to look like a total idiot asshole and fall on your face. And then when you're ready to do that, then you'll make great records. And this applies to musicians and producers, because if you're always playing your comfort zone, there's no risk in it. But if you kind of go, okay, let's go way out here and try this other thing, and where people are really uncomfortable, that's where the great records are made. And I think that it took me a long time to really trust my gut and my instinct, and to push for things that I thought were really important. And it took a while for me to be able to tell people, like, look, we already know how you like it. We have your demos, or we already have this one performance. You like it that way. So we have that, and we'll never lose that. Now let's try this other thing. And getting people to be open to that idea that, okay, I have my safety thing. I have the thing I want. Okay, great. Now let's try it this whole nother way. And that was a big eye opener with me, to really be open with bands to dig deep and be super creative and really, really try to make something not just nice or good, but something great. And even if people really don't like it, but you have to really push to make it great. So I think that was the big thing that took me a long time to figure that out, where I could finally just go, we have to go further than this. We have to try something different. And that was a big thing. Yeah. It's, when people ask me what a producer does who aren't in the music business, and I try to explain to them, I have this kind of little story I come up with, and that is this. Okay, so you and I and some friends are on a little island. Okay, and there's some coconuts. It's nice. And so as a producer, there's a rope bridge that goes up into the mist. I'm like, come on, Niclas, man. There's like, I think this is a nice island, but I think there's something better over there. And you're like, well, what does it look like? I go, I'm not really sure, and I don't know if it's even better over there, but let's go check it out. And so you get all our friends, and we were on the bridge. We're going across the bridge. All of a sudden, the wind's coming up, and you're like, hey, Matt, I don't know about this. Let's go back to our island. I think it was really nice back there. I'm like, Niclas, come on, man, trust me. Like, oh, okay. And so we're on the bridge, and all of a sudden, like, pieces of the bridge are falling out, like where you put your feet down, and there's water rushing down there, and it's really getting like, come on, let's go back. I'm like, come on. And so we finally go through the clouds. There's a bigger, nicer island with more fruit and more vegetables. Okay. And you go, well, why don't you tell me it was like this? I said, well, I didn't know that it was this good, but I knew that where we were at wasn't good enough. And we had to be willing to go there and to go into the mist and into places where you don't know what's going to happen. And so you can walk out and go, oh, okay. And I've had to deal with musicians all the time where they have songs they think are just, hey, the song is good the way it is. Like, I know it's good, but it's not great. And so and as a producer, we'll leave for like a day or two at a time. A song will be in pieces all around, and you have to go home as a producer and tell everyone, trust me, it'll be great. And at night you have to go, oh my God, what am I going to do tomorrow to pull this out and make it work? And so that's the real trick of production is you have to really be open to pushing super hard and trying for greatness. And that doesn't mean things have to be in tune or in time. It has to be great, to move people. Anyway.
I love that
That's
explanation, man. Really, really good.
yeah, I've used it to explain to people before because it really is what it is. Because I've had records like that where literally at night, the song's not together. It's like the old version was like a 7 out of 10, and then I take it all apart, and then it's a 2 out of 10. So it's really not. And like the band will look at me like, what are we going to do with this thing, or what are. And you have to go home at night and then sleep knowing that everybody's like worried about that song, and you have to have the confidence to go, it's gonna be better, and then it does, and then they go, oh my God, this is really great. It's like, I know, I knew we could get there, but you have to really have faith in yourself, and then the band or the artist has to trust you that you're gonna go the distance and make it better. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I really like that. But so also, where can people find more stuff about you, and like hire you, check your discography out and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is through McDonough Management is the spot, and I have a website I haven't looked at in a while, but I have to find what it is. I think it's producer Matt Wallace or Matt Wallace. I can send it. I can send it to you. But so I have a website. The best thing is just to go through my manager Frank, because he's got all my discography there. Then if people want to hire me, they kind of go through him, and that's kind of the best way to do it.
Awesome.
So, but I can send that to you.
Yeah, yes, please, and I'll link it so people can check it out too.
Yeah, website. I'll make a note because I got to find that website. So yeah.
Awesome, man.
Well, I appreciate appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, Niclas. I really do.
Yeah, thank you, man. A real pleasure, man. Thank you, Matt, for coming on. A real pleasure having you here, and I hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Do check out the links, check out Matt's work and all the record he has done if you haven't already. Also, feel free to join the Audio Tribe email list. If you join that email list, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public, chance to ask upcoming guest questions, and there's a link to that in the description. As I said previously, just enter your name and email address and you have joined. Also, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening to this show. We're growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you, so I really appreciate your support. But that's it for this week. Awesome having you here as always. I will see you next week, so take care.